I once did the random act of kindness of a lifetime at a Queens of the Stone Age concert. And I'll tell you all about it on the other side. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. You know what's another great tune, kids? Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon by Urge Overkill. You remember that one? I've been misunderstood for all of my life, but with this saying, girl, it cuts like a knife. The boy's no good. That one came to mind this week. I hadn't thought about that tune in a very long time, but it came back to me via the Facebook. Sometimes the Facebook serves a useful purpose, kids, and that thing was going around this week, the squirrel thing. Did you see the squirrel thing on Facebook? And it says, take a song with the word girl in the title and change girl to squirrel. Fun, right? Facebook can be fun. And so you had Fat Bottom Squirrels, Make the Rock and Roll Go Round. You had Uptown Squirrel, and what came to mind for me was Squirrel, You'll Be a Woman Soon. And as soon as I thought of that, I had a little chuckle. And then the tune started running in my head. Girl, bow, 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 you'll be a woman soon. Weird tune, man, but it's a great song. I really love that tune. And of course, if you're like me, you found that on the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, which is one of the great soundtracks of all time, man. You got that tune for starters. You got the Jungle Boogie, which is, to get down, that funky Jungle Boogie tune, man. You got the Al Green, Let's Stay Together. Love that tune, man. You got the Motown, you got the funk happening, and you got the real, true, hidden gem of the Pulp Fiction soundtrack, which is If Love Is a Red Dress by Maria McKee. And I would try to sing a few bars of that for you, kids, but I would not pretend. That would be a sacrilege. For those words, for that tune to come from these lips would be a crime against music, man, because Maria McKee, wow, what a freaking voice that woman has. And if you listen to that tune, If Love Is a Red Dress, you should be struck, as I was struck, by the power and control that Maria McKee has, man. Now, a little while back, like many years back, I went onto the interweb. We had this thing called YouTube. Now, if you're listening to this 100 years down the line, at the rate we're going, maybe 100 days down the line, we used to have a thing called YouTube, man, which was a video, audio, free-for-all, man, where people could just upload stuff, videos. And then it went all corporate, man. Everything used to be the Wild West, but then it goes corporate, man, as soon as they figured out how to make the money. So I was on the YouTube and I was looking for live videos of Ms. Maria McKee singing If Love Is a Red Dress, Hang Me in Rags, to see, because I always want to know, man, can the person actually do it? You grow up in the 80s glam era like I did, where vocals were such an important part of the thing. And these cats had to really be able to bring it, man, and they could. You know, it matters to me, so I go looking to see if Maria McKee can actually sing this tune with the voice that I hear on the record. And let me tell you, she can, kids. Wow. Dude, I have only seen control like that one other time in my life. It's when I stood right up front at a Feist show, all right? And that was probably, I don't know, like 10 or more years ago, whenever 1, 2, 3, 4 was happening, when she had that big record. And Feist like blew up huge, right? We went and we saw the Feist, and we stood right up front. Really cool, nice to be up that front. It was a great show. I believe Hayden opened, and I really dig Hayden. And so I think Hayden might actually been playing in Feist's band maybe at that point. Anyways, he opened the show. It was cool. And there was a girl beside me on the floor who was just coming on to Feist all night, man, like she was in Perv Row at the strip club. You know what I mean? Feist paid her no attention, but Feist blew my freaking mind because she would open her mouth and nothing would come out. And then you just hear this faint thing, a note beginning. And then without moving, the note would just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it would fill the whole freaking room. She hasn't done anything except breathe. And her control was astounding. I have never seen a better live vocal performance in my life than Feist gave that night. And Maria McKee is the same thing, man. She's got this incredible power in that voice, man. She can grab onto a note and then just turn up the dial, man. It goes up to 11, you know what I mean? And it's freaking mind-blowing. And I'd forgotten about Maria McKee. I went and I bought her record, You Gotta Sin to Get Saved, which was early 90s, which was around Pulp Fiction time-ish. She came on the radar, right? This is one of these Americana people, right, that you probably didn't hear about if you just listened to the radio, which was kind of me. And I was still deep in the throes of the metal world, so, you know, attaching to a Maria McKee would have been quite unusual for me at the time. But I bought her record, and, you know, I watched the live footage, and she is amazing, and there are a few vocalists who can sing with the kind of control and dynamics and power that she has. And I say has because she is current, man. Maria McKee is still making records. She dropped one, I think, last year, which I have just dabbled in. I haven't listened to very closely yet, but she's still out there. She's terrific. If Love is a Red Dress, Hang Me in Rags. What a freaking song, man. And go online and look up live Maria McKee singing that tune. She is really freaking great. And she came to mind courtesy of Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon. Squirrel, You'll Be a Woman Soon. And thank you, Facebook, for bringing that back onto my radar. So how you doing? That's the next big question. It is today, not exactly hot Friday night, kids. It is cold, cold Saturday afternoon. This show's going mainstream, man. We're no longer doing After Dark. We're in the afternoon. I have just watched Arsenal lose again. And I want to be mad about that, but, you know, certain things get normalized. And I'm doing okay. I hope you're doing okay. I had an interesting thing this week, because you'll recall that, I believe it was in the last episode, I made reference to a book by Gordon Corman called Who is Bug Spotter? Gordon Corman he was a literary prodigy. He still is a literary prodigy, but you can't really be that if you're pushing 60 years old, which Gordon Corman is now. How old does that make you feel, kids? Gordon Corman, for those of you who don't know, and if you're a Canadian, you do, but if you're one of my many, many, many international listeners, you may not know Gordon Corman. He was a prodigy, all right? Now, he came along in the late 70s as a 12-year-old, wrote himself a novel, okay? And it was like a 7th grade. Did I just say that? It was a grade 7. All apologies, Canadians. Look, one of the things you can do if you ever need to distinguish whether somebody's American or Canadian, if they say blank grade, they're American. And if they say grade blank, they're Canadian, okay? Canadian says grade 7. American says 7th grade. All right, just, you know, for you international travelers, supposing we're ever allowed to do that again, and you want to figure out if somebody's from a place, that's one of the tells, all right? That's one of the tells. Gordon Corman gets an assignment to do a book review in his grade 7 English, I guess, something like that, and doesn't like the books that are on offer, so writes his own dang book and reviews that. The book that he wrote would be published a couple years later as This Can't Be Happening at MacDonald Hall. Now, you've all read that, right? This Can't Be Happening at MacDonald Hall. It's like a legendary Canadian kids book. There was like a TV series. There's been a whole series of MacDonald Hall books. He was 14 when that book was published, kids. Freaking 14. And he's gone on, he's as I say, he's almost 60 now, and he's released a ton of books. The dude is the quintessential You know, along with Robert Munsch, maybe the quintessential Canadian kids author, Gordon Corman. And there was This Can't Be Happening at McDonald Hall. Another favorite of mine, I Want to Go Home. I read I Want to Go Home I don't know how many freaking times as a kid. I was a reader, kids. And I read I Want to Go Home I don't know how many times. And it's about this kid who is forced to go to summer camp. Still have summer camp? Does that still happen? I don't know. We used to have summer camp and we used to have YouTube 100 years from now. Pay attention, all right? Kid goes to summer camp, doesn't want to go to summer camp, and when he's at summer camp, his name is Rudy, and he's this sort of blasé, chill kid, kind of sardonic, not really interested in being involved, wants to go home. Thus the title, I Want to Go Home. And Rudy takes to trying to escape this island that the camp is on, all right? Now, as we go through the book, it's revealed that Rudy is a freaking prodigy too. He's a prodigy at everything. Dude can dance. Dude can play sports like nobody's business. He's a champion swimmer. He's everything. This kid, Rudy, is a dynamo. He can do freaking anything. And throughout the course of the book, it's just escape attempts, most of them successful, some of them not. And little games he plays, and the counselor's trying to keep an eye on what on earth Rudy is up to, right? Unsmiling, unlaughing Rudy, who has the brain and the athleticism and the talent of a world-class everything. And it's a wonderful freaking book, man. You know, if you want to get your kids into some reading, you know, get them off the screens, you know, get them off whatever it is they do on the screens. Go look up some of these Gordon Corman books, man. I Want to Go Home. This Can't Be Happening in McDonald Hall. And my favorite, Who is Bugs Potter? Now, Who is Bugs Potter, of course, is about a kid. He's like 14, something like that, high school, named Bugs Potter, and he's a drummer, man. And the whole setting for this is they've brought together all these high school musicians from across Canada. The creme de la creme kids. And they brought them together in a hotel room in Toronto. This is like the field trip of a lifetime. And they've all been brought together to like rehearse for a couple weeks and then put on like a big show, the big high school band show at the X or someplace. I don't remember. And the drummer that they bring in is Mr. Bugs Potter, and he has a flute guy called Adam, okay, as his roommate. Uptight, a little bit frightened, exasperated Adam, who takes it upon himself to put the reins on crazy drummer boy Bugs Potter. Now, Bugs Potter's not all that interested in what the band is doing, the orchestra. He's much more interested in getting out into the Toronto nightlife to see all of his favorite heavy metal bands who are coming through and playing the clubs during the time that they are there. And his other big thing is he wants to meet Bibi Lene. And Bibi Lene is kind of like a Marilyn Monroe type movie star who happens to also be staying in the same hotel, Swanky Hotel Kids, where she's there to like premiere her movie or whatever new thing is happening. So it's this game of Bugs trying to come up with schemes to get past security and meet Bibi Lene. Plumbing, that kind of stuff. And then he's realizing, hey, Endomorph is in town playing. We're going to go to that. And Adam's like, dude, we can't leave you can't go see Endomorph at some club. But he manages to go, and Adam manages to go with him to try and, you know, if you can't beat him, join him, and let's keep an eye on this kid so nothing bad happens, you know. And it's this whole cycle of Potter going out, fake mustaches to get into the clubs, right? And playing drums with these metal bands. He talks his way onto stage, and he does this a couple of times. And then there begins to be a ripple through the metal world about this mysterious drummer who keeps turning up called Bugs Potter, right? And blowing people's freaking minds. The kid's a prodigy. Gordon Corman knows a few things about being a prodigy, right? And so it's this really fun story of the legend of Bugs Potter growing. And there'll be like 4 metal bands in town, and it'll be like, which club is he going to? And the people will be like trying to figure it out and showing up, and there's this, you know, pandemonium, this phenomenon like Bugs Mania happens, right? And all these metal bands are like hoping he shows up kind of thing, you know, because it's a big deal to have this legend Bugs Potter come and sit in. It's a wonderful freaking book, man. And I don't know where. I'm trying to rack my brains to figure out where I got my hands on this, but I have a signed copy of the book in my possession. Now, Gordon Corman did not sign the book for me, and I'm assuming the signature is authentic, all right? But I was in a bookstore someplace, and there's a huge part of me that wants to say it was Seaside Books in Summerside, Prince Edward Island. And I did an interview earlier on the show with Nancy from that bookstore, and you can find it in my archives, all right? Great lady, cool store. I want to say I got it there, and I probably didn't, but it would be romantic to say so. I was on tour as a drummer in Prince Edward Island, finding the book about the drummer that so moved me as a kid, the drummer who's a heavy metal fan. It's like he's writing my story, kids. Except the part where he was the best guy in Canada and they brought him on the trip, you know what I mean? So it's a wonderful book, and I mention it now because I got a message from our boy Dooz, who's practically part of the show now, and having listened to that episode wrote to me to say, hey, Who is Bugs Potter was one of my favorite books too. And worlds are just colliding, man. It's like he and I are living the same life. Still waiting for him to turn up with a Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes, copy of that 45. Haven't seen that yet. But if it happens, I'll say, do you have the other half of this amulet? That's a Cheers reference, okay, kids? Now, our friend Jay, he wrote with some covers of Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. One by Sonny and Cher that I try to keep it positive, kids, but that was a freaking travesty, all right? Nothing beats the original, but if you want to really be upset, because you love that song like I do, go and find Sonny and Cher doing it and be so thankful for Edison Lighthouse and Tony Burrows, all right? Now, the Gordon Corman thing and the signed copy of Bugs Potter, the mystery, got me thinking about something, all right? Now, I don't have a lot of signed books. I got a couple of really funny signed book stories, though, okay? A funny one and a profound one. I'll do the funny one real quick, all right? My friend Mark and I went to see David Sedaris read, all right? David Sedaris, comedy. I don't know if he's a comedy writer. He writes essays, but they're very clever and very funny. Made himself a heck of a career out of that, David Sedaris. Very funny man. So we went to see him read, and then he did a signing after, right? So we get in line because we're going to go meet Dave. And my friend Mark takes the book up to Sedaris, right? And so Sedaris is sitting down at the table. Hey, how you doing? Starts to write in it, and Mark is talking at him, right? Saying, I don't remember what. Talking, and every now and again, David Sedaris would nod or he would smile or something like that. And then when he got done, he handed the book back to Mark, and what he had drawn is a picture of a head. This is David Sedaris signing the book. He'd drawn a picture of a head with like stuff flying out of the mouth. And he says, here you go, Mark. This is a picture of you throwing up. And someday, man, when I publish my novel, in some bizarro future world, I'm going to do that kind of thing too, I think. It's really funny. David Sedaris, what a strange and funny man. But my other more profound book signing story comes from our old friend Douglas Coupland, all right? Now, if you're Canadian, you probably know Doug, and if you're an American, you probably know Doug, too. Most famous for the book Generation X, but also Microsurfs and a slew of others. Zeitgeist books, kind of future-predicting books, books about tech, books about, disaffected Gen X people like me. And I latched on to Doug kind of in the late 90s, all right. It was Dooz again, actually, who tipped me off to Doug, and it was Generation X, I think, that he probably told me I should look at. And I didn't right away. Now, I was an attempted writer at that point in time. I was beginning to try to write, okay? Now, I was writing really bad fantasy because that's the world that I came from. So I thought, you should write what you know, kids. And hey, who knows magic more than I do? Olivia Newton-John, man. You see how the strings just tie together? You see how it all just comes together, kids? I was living in Japan, right? And I had written one book that was at least written. And that in itself is an accomplishment, okay? It was not good, but it was written. And that's the first step. And we were living in Japan. My wife was teaching, and I was tutoring and writing and doing some stuff. And we had a little tiny apartment, 4 tatami mat rooms, all right? Actually, a kitchen and 3 tatami mat rooms. And I could basically stretch my arms out and touch both walls in all of them, all right? Very tiny Japanese apartment. But this apartment was owned by the program that had hired my wife to teach, all right? Or it was rented by them or whatever. So they had it for their incoming teachers, right? Teacher comes, does their year contract, moves out, next teacher comes in. We were the next teacher at one point. Would have been 1998, I guess, when we went there. And there's a cubby where you store your mattresses. No beds, kids, no beds. You roll up your mattress, you put it in the cubby. Take it out, you put it on the floor, you go to sleep, right? Not a lot of space, had to be economical, so you had a cubby for your blankets and your bed. But as there had been a collection of English teachers coming through this apartment, there was also a collection of books that they left behind. And so we're sifting through the books, and one of them is Life After God by Douglas Coupland. Now, do you believe in destiny, kids? Do you believe in kismet and karma and synchronicity? Because I try to and I want to, and I sometimes feel naive when I do. But finding that book in that place, in that moment, is pretty freaking incredible. Because that book changed me as a writer. For what it's worth. I had never considered writing in this kind of first-person confessional style, which you find in all of Douglas Coupland's early stuff. Right up to Miss Wyoming, where he switched to the third person and began experimenting with different kinds of forms, you know. But the first 5 or 6 books, kind of the big Coupland books, were these first-person narratives that I'd never really considered before. Even having done an English degree, I'd never really considered that kind of delivery. And when I read Life After God and could not put it down, it remains a top 3 novel of all time for me, not just because of its influence on me, but because it's just a wonderful book. It's a strange narrative. It's a dark narrative. It's a very plaintive narrative, but it's about spirituality and it's about feeling lost. And I'm a, mid-20-something kid feeling exactly that. Having my ideas about religion turned upside down. I had walked away from the teaching profession and didn't know what on earth I was going to do with myself. I was trying to write a little bit. And this book just came along at the right time. It connected with me, man, and I became a voracious kind of Doug guy. And I still read everything that Coupland puts out, and I really like his work, and I'm influenced by it just a little bit too much at certain points in time. Less so now, but in that moment, I came home from Japan having read that book and then having had Generation X shipped to me so I could read that. And I came home and I wrote another book. It just burst out of me, this book that I wrote. For what it's worth, again, never published or anything like that. Heartily and thoroughly rejected, though, kids, so I was in the game. Still got the rejection letters, all right. But I was so influenced by this book, Life After God, but then after a certain point I became frustrated, okay? Because Douglas Coupland was writing about the same stuff as me. He was writing about this sort of disaffected feeling and spirituality and religion and God and the universe and some of these pop culture things. I felt as though Doug and I were on the same wavelength, man. So why on earth is his fiction so successful and I got a bucket full of rejection notices, This was weighing me down. What was I doing wrong? Doug and I are on about the same stuff. Doug and I are practically the same person. Now, this is the trap that you can't fall into, kids, all right? This is where I'm going with this. This is for everybody out there who's engaged in some sort of creative pursuit, okay? Like a day before my 30th birthday. Turns out Doug's coming to town, gonna do a reading. Well, I'm going. And I take my copy of Life After God with me. And Douglas Coupland's a Japanophile, man. He lived there. One of the characters in Generation X has lived in Japan. Parallel lives, man. We're practically the same freaking person. So I go to the reading with Doug, and something extraordinarily profound happens, kids. I watch Doug read. It's great. He was reading from Hey Nostradamus at the time. And he's doing Q&A and he's answering people's questions. And it occurs to me that Douglas Coupland and I aren't the same person at all. We don't think the same. We don't speak the same. We don't have the same frame of reference. We may be interested in some of the same things, We are not the same freaking person. And then the next level of profundity on that is that Doug's fiction works because it's Doug's fiction. I've been writing Doug's fiction, but I ain't Doug, man. And it's the same thing if you're a musician and you find yourself writing similar stuff to Foo Fighters, let's say, as a plug for the next segment of this show. Or you're a Nirvana fan, or you really love Kiss, and you're writing all these riffs that are like Kiss, man, and why is nobody jumping onto it? Or Ed Sheeran, or Pink, or anybody. You're like, why is it not grabbing an audience? Because you're not them. They are working from them. You need to work from you. Now, I've been reading If You Want to Write by Brenda Ueland, which is one of the sort of seminal writing books, you know. This came out of like the 30s, but the principles remain, and it's all about expressing your own creative gift. Working from your own creative heart. Now, I have talked about Mark Lehner on this show a bunch, and I will some more. Probably my favorite writer of fiction. A complete, brilliant lunatic, Mark Lehner. And I started writing like him when I was still trying to write, and I was reading his stuff. Go read A2 Babe, probably my favorite novel ever. And then it occurs to me, well, this isn't going to work, man, because I'm not Mark Lehner. And he's not putting on anything special. He's not doing anything. I'm trying to use the word affectation in some way, and it ain't working. It ain't effective. He's just writing as Mark Lehner. He's writing from Mark Lehner. Doug was writing from Doug. King's X is writing from King's X. And you can be influenced by that, but to imitate it is creative suicide, kids. It will not work. Or if it does, it won't last. You know what I mean? There's a reason why there are about 6 glam metal bands that anybody remembers. Because everybody else was copying them. Very few of them were the pioneers, the people that were writing from themselves. You know what I mean? And this happens with any genre that becomes really popular. You get imitators. And I have been deathly guilty of this as a creative person. And now here we are at my advancing age, my firmly established middle age, trying to figure out what on earth is my actual creative voice. What matters to me? Where does this come from? And if you're stuck right now with whatever creative thing you're on about, whatever you're trying to do, and it ain't working, stop and think, am I creating this from me? Or am I creating this from somebody else's inspiration? And I don't have an answer for you as to whether you are or not, because I'm only now really twigging to this concept, even though it was presented to me by Doug almost 20 years ago. I'm not him. Of course my writing doesn't work like his. My process doesn't either. The point is to get down to what is you. And I don't know how you do that, but if I figure it out, I'll let you know, okay? All right, I've already gone further here than I expected to, so let's get spinning, shall we? Are the spinning segments working for you? I don't know, man. I get feedback, a little bit of feedback that people want to talk about whatever the record was I was talking about, or have an anecdote or have a suggestion. So there seems to be some hint that people are enjoying that segment. I hope you are. And I don't know if I'll keep doing it every week, but I'm going to do it this week because this week, one of the biggest rock and roll bands in the world dropped a new record, and that is the Foo Fighters, man. Foo Fighters popped up on the show a few weeks ago after Biden was confirmed as having won the presidential election, and they played Saturday Night Live that evening. And that was a moment of catharsis and healing for the whole damn world. And I don't know if that's still happening, but it was happening at that moment, all right? So Foo's dropped a new record. It is called Medicine at Midnight. Now, I got to go into this with something of a, I was about to say a disclaimer, but it doesn't really need a disclaimer. But I will say that I've never been a card-carrying Foo Fighters guy, all right? like the Foo Fighters, have always liked the Foo Fighters. You know, I like the radio songs. They have been single-handedly at times carrying the torch for guitar-based rock and roll music for a long dang time, you know? And I love Dave Grohl. I think, you know, I talk about Jackie Neville as being the last rock star. I think Dave Grohl might actually be the last rock star. Like the last old school household name rock star. We used to have those kids back in the day. You know, the band would come out and you would know everybody's name. Name all the people in Coldplay if you can. Name all the people in the Foo Fighters. I'm about to do a segment on them and I can't. You know what I mean? It used to be that they were marketed as individuals, as personalities. You knew all the members of Kiss. You knew all the members of Van Halen. You knew all the members of those glam bands that everybody likes to make so much fun of. Name all the people in Soundgarden. Name all the people in Pearl Jam. You know, it was not the same. It was not marketed in the same way. They made larger-than-life characters out of these people. Who is the greatest rock star of all time? I don't mean the most talented or the most gifted. I mean, who is like the ultimate rock star persona character, right? Larger than life, like superheroes they were. Kiss even looked like superheroes, you know, from another planet. Who is it? Is it David Lee Roth? Is it Gene Simmons? Is it Vince Neil or Tommy Lee? Is it Jimmy Page? I don't know who the biggest rock star of all time is, but that's how they used to be marketed, man. And I think the last one is Dave Grohl. And he's not marketed that way. He's marketed, I don't know if he's marketed at all. He's very grunge in that sense. You know, the one thing that grunge had going for it was that it was in some ways unpretentious. That was the point. We can look like we rolled up out of our car or from underneath it and just go up and play the show, man. Didn't need no pyro, didn't need no spandex, didn't need no dazzling light shows. Just get up and play the music. And I'm okay with that. I'm down with that. But I never got hugely into the Foo Fighters in terms of I buy their records and I'm a big fan. So I'm not coming at you with some sort of bias. In fact, my biggest connection to Foo Fighters is not to Foo Fighters at all, but to a different band. And that band is Face to Face, kids. Do you know Face to Face? California punk from the 90s through today. Now, if you are into super fast, melodic, really banging punk music, Face to Face, man. I saw them at the Call the Office in London, Ontario. Back in like 97, 98, they were touring on their self-titled record, which was great. That was a killer show, and some years later, I wound up playing that stage. Call the Office, the venerable old Call the Office, which during the pandemic ceased operations, kids, and that's a freaking tragedy, because that room is soaked in history. I used that room in a book I was writing. That club, you know, you walk into Call the Office and there are just photos on the wall, like promo photos of all the bands, like Blink-182 and Radiohead, like bands played there, man, before they became who we know them as now. Call the Office was a breeding ground. It's one of the places that you play across this country as a rite of passage. And I wrote that passage myself, playing there with Hearts, playing there with Carly Thomas, playing there with Nimue, and it was an honor to be on that freaking stage, man, where I saw Face to Face among many other big-time touring bands. And I love Face to Face, and my boy Banksy, Chris Banks the poet, whose interview you can read earlier in my archives as well, or listen to rather. He took me to see the Face to Face, and great band, just a banging, really fast, tight, melodic punk rock band. Get there, self-titled, get Big Choice. Great band, man, awesome band. And the connection is their wonderful freaking bass player, who's a King's X fan, Scott Shiflett, who, if you follow him on Instagram, you'll realize is also an amazing lead guitar player. Dude can just play stringed instruments, man. Scott Shiflett. Now, if you're a Foo Fighters fan, you already know the connection. Because there's a cat who plays guitar, another great guitarist for the Foos, called Chris Shiflett, who is Scott Shiflett's brother. So the connection to the Foos for me was actually via Face to Face. But I like the Foo Fighters. I don't really buy their records, but I do like the radio songs. I acknowledge their significance to rock and roll, and I acknowledge Dave Grohl as the last rock star. But now we get to this record. Medicine at Midnight dropped this week, very timely, just in time for me to record a podcast episode, so I've been listening, and I gotta tell you, the record is growing on me, and that does not mean that it wasn't good from the start. but it's getting better with each listen. So it opens with this tune called Making a Fire. And right away, it just comes in with drums, and I'm counting this tune in 6, so it's got a bit of an odd time feel, but right off the bat, I'm like, I love the drum sounds on this record, man. And Taylor Hawkins is a great drummer, and he's had a very difficult assignment, man. It's not easy to be the drummer in a band fronted by Dave Grohl, who's on the Legends list, okay? But Taylor Hawkins, in his own right, is a fine, fine rock and roll drummer and takes a second candle, takes a second chair to nobody, okay? And he kicks this tune off with some cool sounding drums, a nice little groove, and then a big rock song happens. Hey, it's a Foo Fighters record, man! And what's cool about it is that they've brought in, there's almost like a gospel feel on it. There's harmonies happening kind of on the choruses and stuff, and there's like a breakdown where it's like a cappella with these big choral kind of harmonies, which is cool. And I feel like it's a great album kickoff, you know? It's just a nice driving rock tune, big chorus, some very cool gospel choral harmonies. And then we go to the next song, Shame, Shame. And I think Shame, Shame was the first single. And they played it on Saturday Night Live that night. That was the first time I heard it. And I really liked it. And it's strange because it's not a tune that, I was about to say it's more than the sum of its parts, but I'm not even sure that's the right way to put it. It's subtle, just a subtle little bow, 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 bow. You know what I mean? Like it's not got an exotic kind of riff, but it's got such a deep pocket, man. And it's got this really nice little groove happening. Now, I gotta say, I like the live version better than I like the CD version. The CD version. I'm dating myself. The studio version is got more going on. There's more going on in the drums. There's more sounds happening. And I think for me, it takes away some of the catchiness of that bow, bow. It's that little lick, that little hook is a real good hook, man. And it got me on Saturday Night Live. And I'm like, I don't know why I like this tune so much. It doesn't seem to be a lot happening, but that hook is a meaty one. And for me, it gets a little bit drowned out in the studio version, but this is a cool song. I really like this tune. And there's some strings happening through it that get to be kind of cool. And I'm sure you've heard it on the radio by now. And cool tune. And I don't know if it's a classic or not. If there's a classic on this record, maybe that's it. I'm not sure. Shame, Shame. It's cool. Check out the Saturday Night Live version if you can, because I feel like it was just a little leaner, and I liked it quite a lot. Maybe it was the moment. You know, sometimes your affection for a tune is influenced by the moment in which you heard it. And there was so much catharsis happening that night, even though it was when they did Times Like These that the real catharsis happened. But maybe I was just feeling happy in that moment and the tune grabbed me, and maybe the arrangement was exactly the same. I don't know. But it felt like I liked that better. But I do like this tune. It's cool. It's super hooky, and maybe you'll like it too, man. Next is Cloud Spotter, okay? And my reaction to this is that it sounds like a Queens of the Stone Age song, and that's no surprise given Grohl's connection to Josh Homme and Queens of the Stone Age, played on their record. Toured with them a little bit. I got a fun live story. You know, it's a day for book signing and live stories. I told you the Feist one. I went to see Queens of the Stone Age with my pal Stace a couple years ago. They were in town. Went down to the arena, went right up front. And right up front is not where I like to be, okay? I like to enjoy the music without wondering whether an elbow or a foot is coming at me from the crowd surfers who are coming up from the back. And I don't like being in the middle of a bunch of push and shove, and I don't like any of that. You know, it's not my scene. I want to hear the music, okay? It's one of the great things about now being a little bit older is that the bands that I grew up idolizing are also older, and their crowd is older. So I go to the King's X show, and we stand there and we sing. You know, it's very gentle. It's very docile, you know, even though the music is banging and heavy. Ain't nobody punching each other in the face. It's kind of a nice atmosphere to be in to just enjoy the music. Now, everybody at the King's X show tends to be a musician and be there to enjoy the music. But the Queens of the Stone Age show, which, you know, by pit, it was not even a pit. By show standards, not all that rowdy, but it's not my scene, man. I don't like being up front all that much at a show like that. I was feeling a little bit claustrophobic, because I look back and there's like, I don't know how many thousand people standing behind me. I'm like, if pyro happens, if we get a great white thing happening here, I'm in trouble, man. Now I could jump over the security gate. Like it was right there, like right up front. I could maybe get out that way. And this is what's going through my head while the show's going. Like I'm missing the show, man. Wondering about my own safety. Not where I want to be. Stacy's a big fan. She wanted to be up front, so up front we went. And, when we were like 2 people back, maybe 3 people back, but I'm tall enough that I can see, right? And at a certain point, I feel something pushing behind me. It's just pushing, just like a little pushing on my left side. Push, 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 trying to squeeze through me and the guy beside me. You need allegiances when you're up front, okay? You and the guy beside you have an unspoken pact. My shoulder, your shoulder, buddy. Nobody gets through. And you got each other's back, I feel this push, 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 push behind me. Low on my back, so I'm thinking it's like a short person. And so I kind of look over my shoulder, and there's this little girl, I don't know how old she'd be, 20 maybe? And she's like 5 feet tall, and she's just burrowing. She's like Sonic the Hedgehog. She's just like burrowing. She's got like her head in my back, just pushing for all she's worth. And I had been resisting this because I thought it was some dude, and that's the way it works. When you're up front, it's very territorial. This girl's pushing, 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 pushing. And finally she looks up and she's like, come on, you can move up at least 3 inches closer. Come on. And she's pushing, pushing. She's like, this is my favorite band ever. And she's like having a bit of a meltdown. And so I looked at her and she's pushing. And I'm like, the cartoons where the big guy holds the little guy's face at arm's length and the little guy's punching underneath him for all he's worth. It's that kind of a scene. So then I take a step back, kids. Benevolent me shows up. Too nice for my own good. I takes a step back and I let the girl walk in front of me. And she threw her arms around me. I think there was a tear in her eye. There were warm cockles, kids, in that moment. And I could see over her head. No issues there. So I let the girl through, and she had suddenly a wide open view of her favorite band in the world, and it makes me feel happy to this day, all right? That's the most memorable moment for me from the whole Queens of the Stone Age show, is when I let that girl have the moment of her life. This tune, Cloud Spotter, makes me think of Queens of the Stone Age. It's got kind of a funk vibe, and it's a jumper. The chorus is a jumper, okay? Now I'm picturing 60,000 people at Wembley Stadium. When they hit the chorus on Cloud Spotter, just bouncing up and down, just jumping. I can see it. You can probably picture something like that in your mind, and it's that kind of song, all right? Super heavy bridge happening. Like, this is a rock and roll album, man. This is a rock and roll album. It's the Foo Fighters, and it sounds like the freaking Foo Fighters, all right? Then there's a tune called Waiting on a War, and this is an acoustic-ish, mostly acoustic tune. A little bit gentle, still upbeat, and I like it. What struck me about it, though, is that it just kind of comes in with Dave and a guitar. And I was like, this sounds familiar. And then it struck me. Got another confession to make. It sounded like that. It sounded like another big old Foo Fighters song. And if you're going to put a song on a new record that sounds like somebody, you might as well put on one that sounds like one of yours that's a staple on rock radio, right? It's got another one of those. It reminded me of that, okay? Well, what happens is it's a pretty gentle tune. It's upbeat, but it's gentle, right? And then it starts to pick up, man. And then it really picks up and keeps picking up faster and faster and faster and faster. And Taylor Hawkins is just crushing this tune, man. Dude is a great drummer, an underrated and under-heralded drummer. Because his front man is freaking Dave Grohl, But, like, he's really crushing by the end of this tune. So it picks up hot, and I like it. And live, I think it'd be pretty cool. There's also some whoa, whoa, whoas on this tune at a certain point. Now, this is my lesson to all you burgeoning rock and roll songwriters, and you pop guys and pop girls. Get some whoa, whoas into your tunes, all right? Go watch a live U2 show. Look and see how many whoa-whoa sections there are in that show, and look at how 40,000 people jump on it when it comes. Get some whoa-whoas happening, and you are guaranteed crowd participation, okay? That's an important thing. Get a whoa-whoa hook happening. They got one on this tune. Then we go to the title track, Medicine at Midnight. And when it started, I thought, that's Land Down Under. Yeah, that's Land Down Under by Men at Work, man. And then I played it for my wife, and I'm like, does this intro remind you of something? And she says, yeah, it's I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston. And then she played me like a live one, and it's like, yep, it's got that same kind of, these weird sounds come in, and then the tune starts. It's like, it's that. It's an 80s tune. There's an 80s undercurrent. There's an 80s vibe happening on this record. And then my wife said the vocals sound like Bowie, and I wasn't even sure it was Dave Grohl in the first verse. I'm not sure now. The vocals sounded different, a little more subtle, and yeah, maybe a bit of a Bowie vibe happening there. And Lord knows we got a lot of Bowie fans out there, man. And I almost thought it had kind of a blues feel to it. Just a little bit of a bluesy vibe to it. It's a cool song. It's a bit chill, you know, but it's got something. This is what happens with a lot of the tunes on this record, is that they have something. And that's why I say it keeps growing on me the more I listen to it, because if every tune has something, you know, early on you can't necessarily define it. But later, with more listens, it becomes more familiar, and you're like, yeah, there's a hook in there that got me at first that I wasn't really paying attention to, like they're peripheral kind of things. And there's something about this tune, the title track to this record, that I really dig, and it feels 80s, and it feels just a little bit bluesy to me. No Son of Mine. Dew sent me No Son of Mine a few weeks ago. I guess they probably released that as a single too, I guess. I'm guessing. I don't know. I'm not following this stuff. And he's like, what does this remind you of? It's another one of these, what does this remind you of songs? And when it started, I'm like, it reminds me of Enter Sandman. That's what it reminds me of. And he thought the same thing. And the opening riff has that kind of walk down a little bit like Enter Sandman does. It does not have the same tone. This is not a metal song, you know, it's a rock and roll tune, but it's not a metal song. It doesn't have that kind of brutal guitar tone that the Black Album is so famous for. That's a heavy album, man. That is an extremely heavily produced album. But it has that kind of, the riff sounds a little bit like Enter Sandman, but then the song really kicks into gear, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's Ace of Spades, dude. That is Ace of Spades. It just picks way up, just flying through this tune, and I'm like, that's Ace of Spades, man. And I'm going to guess that Grohl was a huge Lemmy guy, because who isn't, really, you know? Lemmy is God. And what you get there is just like a big, old, banging rock and roll song, man. Sounds like Metallica a bit. Sounds like Motorhead. And you cannot go wrong, kids. All who would aspire to rock and roll stardom, you cannot go wrong being influenced by Metallica and by Motorhead. Even if you aren't a metal band, even if you aren't like a metal punk band, Motorhead occupied this weird space, man, coming out of the 70s. Metal crowd liked them, punk crowd liked them. Weird, because normally those two crowds were like two gangs in the street, man. They did not interbreed. They did not cross over, but somehow, kind of like Alice in Chains for the metal and grunge crowd, Motorhead for the metal and punk crowd was all good. So if you can model yourself on Motorhead, you're not doing too bad, man. And even the Foo Fighters do it on this tune, in my opinion. Then we get to Holding Poison, which does not sound like a Poison song. And I know that's going to disappoint some of you. Doesn't sound like a Poison tune, all right? But it does sound to me like a 90s, like almost like a No Doubt kind of vibe to me, you know? I can't really put my finger on what this sounds like. Again, there's a lot of this sounds like something going on this record. It seemed to me like a 90s kind of vibe, not exactly a ska vibe, but something. But then there's like a section of it that sounds like the Rocky Horror Show to me. Like it's a musical, like there's all these, you know, harmonies again in these voices. Sounds like Rocky Horror Show to me, which is kind of weird. Wasn't expecting that, but it's another big rock and roll song. Good for them. Then we get to a ballad called Chasing Birds. Played it for my wife. She said Beatles. I'm like, I'll accept that. Cool. I like that song. It's a change of pace. And again, we're talking about albums here, kids, not just dropping singles. We're talking about putting together an album. We're talking about sequencing. And we just had a couple of we had a good mid-tempo title track. Then we had No Son of Mine, and we had Holding Poison, which are two kind of big banging rock songs. Let's switch the tempo, man. Let's give the kids a chance to breathe. And in comes Chasing Birds, which is a kind of a dreamy ballad acoustic vibe. And yeah, does sound a little bit like the Beatles to me, if you want to kind of stretch that far. Doesn't sound like Paul singing, doesn't sound like John singing, but it's cool and I like it, all right? Then we get to the album closer. One of the things I like about this album, for my purposes as a podcast that reviews albums, no, doesn't review albums, spins albums. One of the great things about this one is that it's a short record, 9 tunes. And it ends with Love Dies Young. And if you're looking for something for this to sound like, it's Iron Maiden, kids. Oh yeah, it comes in with this galloping guitar riff. Again, not produced like an Iron Maiden song, does not have the same sort of Iron Maiden guitar tone, because who does, right? Iron Maiden's tone is singular. But it's got that kind of a chunky feel, or like the Heart tune, Barracuda, you know? It sounds a little bit like that. Comes in, you know? It's heavy. And then they play and play and play. And then after the chorus, it's Big Country. Like a guitar line comes in that's In a Big Country by Big Country. And I'm okay with that, man, because In a Big Country is one of my favorite 80s tunes, all right? I love that tune. And there's just a guitar tone and this line that happens kind of after the chorus that sounds, it harkens back to In a Big Country by Big Country. So if you're looking for like comparables and things that this sounds like, we've had Metallica and we've had, Men at Work and we've had Big Country and we've had Iron Maiden and we've had Whitney freaking Houston and the Beatles. But somehow it all manages to be the Foo Fighters, man. And I haven't really listened to a Foo Fighters record all the way through in a very long time, and I'm glad I did with this one, because the band is still rocking, and Dave Grohl, apart from being a legendary drummer, great drummer, guitar player, singer, all that stuff, and a terrific frontman, the last rock star, Dave Grohl is also a super prolific songwriter, man. Like this band, and I don't know if the band writes with them, maybe they do, probably they do. Actually, I know that Taylor Hawkins has had his own tunes on some of these records. So yeah, the band collectively is prolific, and they keep putting out really good rock and roll records, and they are not slowing down with age, man. They're still rocking hard, still carrying the torch for guitar rock, and I respect the Foo Fighters for that, man. And if you haven't listened to a Foo Fighters record in a long time, or if you've only gone as deep as the radio hits, of which there are many, 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 an enviable list of radio hits from the Foos, man, check out this record. I will put a tune on the John Huff podcast referenced on the pod playlist. I'll put Maria McKee on there. I'll put Urge Overkill on there, and I'll put a little bit of this, and you can check out pretty much everything we've talked about in the last 6 months or whatever. On that playlist on Spotify, go check it out, all right? And have a listen to this record. Have a listen to all the records we talk about, and let me know what you think. Am I out to lunch on this? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did I miss something? Because it's possible, man. And if there are records you think I ought to check out to spin on this podcast, by all means, let me know. Gonna wrap up, because again, we're creeping up on that hour, man. And I don't know how it happens. I meant to keep these shorter, but they just keep hitting at the hour. Do me a favor, like and subscribe wherever you can, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please do leave me a rating and review, preferably a positive one. Warms my cockles, helps me out. I hope you're doing okay, man. I hope everybody's healthy. I hope everybody's happy. Hope the sun is shining where you are. Drop me a line. Let me know what's up. Let me know what you think of the show. If there's anything you want to add, want me to talk about, got a favorite book, you like Gordon Carman, let me know. Hope you're doing okay. Gonna check out. Take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll check you later. Thank you once again, gentle listener, for taking in today's show. If you want to know more about the program, go to www.john-huff.com. That's JOHN-HUFF.com and click on podcast. You can also find the show on Facebook at The John Huff Podcast. If you're an Instagram person, you can find me at JW_Huff. If you're a Twitter person, you can find me at @JWSHuff. No matter where you listen to the show, please do me a big favor and leave a rating and review. Preferably a positive one. That's all the time we have for today, but I'll be back very soon. Until then, keep your wits about you and remember, good things happen when you put yourself out there. Bye for now. Fat bottom squirrels, you make the rockin' world go